Hey, today we are going to be making a third-person controller within Unity. It's going to be a very simple controller, mind you, but let's just jump right into it. The topics we're going to be covering are going to be input, turning, and movement of the player. So let's just jump right into Unity. As you can see over here, I just have a very simple cube player that we're going to be making move. Let's call him Bobby because, Bobby's fun. You can see over here is just a cube with nothing more than just a box collider and a cube inside of it. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and select the cube that we want the main player to be. You can call the player and go ahead and create a script. Let's call it movement, and once it adds it over here, make sure it adds it to the object. The component is added. We're gonna go ahead and double click it and sure, reload. So here we have an empty script, and we're gonna go ahead and make this player move. So there's going to be a few things we're going to have over here on the top. We will need a speed variable to be able to control how fast the guy is moving. So let's create a public variable called public float speed. Now this is going to control how fast he's moving. Second variable we'll need is actually the camera. So again, we're going to do public camera, and let's call it myCam. The reason we have this camera here is because we want the direction of the movement to be based off of the camera. So if your camera is facing left, he's going to be facing it, in according to the camera angle. It'll make more sense once we start implementing it over here. So just trust over here. Let's go ahead and add a vector 3 for movement, if I could spell movement. So this is a private variable. You can actually, and probably should, include the word private over here because we don't need to access this on the outside. This variable, vector3, is going to hold our movement coordinates. So it's going to be able to hold our movement positions. We're going to go ahead and add a rigid body, and let's just call it RB. And the other thing we're going to need is a speed equalizer, which I will explain as we get to it. These are also private. You don't need to always type private, but it's a good habit to type private. So let's go ahead and type private for all three of these. And then we're almost at the update over here, but let's, in the start function, make sure we have assigned RBR component of rigid body. So you're going to say RB equals get component, and we're going to make it equal to the rigid body component. And that reminds me, if you go ahead and save this and minimize and go back to Unity, let's make sure that our player actually has a rigid body component on it. So we're going to go ahead and click add component on our player and do rigid body. And if you actually open this, you can see all the rigid body properties, which we do not need to touch. We're just going to leave that on there because we're going to access that. So let's go back into it. Now that we have the rigid body access in here, we're going to go ahead and start typing some code. The first thing we need is input. So I'm going to just type in comment here just so we know what's going on. We're going to need two variables for the input, one for the horizontal movement and one for the vertical. It won't actually be vertical since it's in 3D plane. We're going to need it to be in the Z axis, but we can call it vertical. Or if you want to call it really, you can call it X and Z because that's what they really are controlling. So we're going to call float, and let's create a horizontal variable, and let's get the input from our horizontal axis because this is what's going to control it. So make sure the spelling case is correct here, horizontal. And then let's do a float, vertical, and let's do input get axis and vertical. So these are predefined axes in our input manager. We don't need to touch those, but this is how we're going to get the input. Let's go ahead and do the turning next. The reason we're doing turning next is because we need to be able to get our movement variable assigned before we actually finally put the movement variable into our movement, which a lot of movements. So let's just say comment again, call turning, keep it organized, very important. We're going to go ahead and assign our movement variable that we created on top over here, which is currently empty, and we're going to give it the variables that we just created. So let's go ahead and say new vector 3, and for the X we're going to say horizontal because if you remember this was the X, and then we don't need to do anything for the Y, so we're going to leave that, and then for the Z we're going to do vertical. Save that. So now it has the movement saved in our input saved into that vector 3. Let's go ahead and, so this next line is kind of tricky, but basically what we're doing is we are converting our vector 3 based off of our camera direction. So it's a little bit complicated, but we can just go ahead and type in mycam, because that's the camera that we're going to assign outside soon. mycam.transform direction, and within parentheses we're going to put in the movement function that we have just assigned values to over here. So this is going to take what's in here and kind of transform it based off of our camera's direction. Next, let's make sure that our direction is greater than 0.1. And I like to do that because if you don't, then sometimes, especially on the controller, your character will keep rotating even though you let go, because there's slight bit of adjustments. It doesn't always go to exactly 0 when you let go of the joystick. So it's a good habit that I just end up doing. Or maybe my preference, but we're going to go ahead and open a parenthesis for an if condition and another parenthesis, because we're going to have two statements here, one for the horizontal, one for the vertical. So let's just open two parentheses here, and then let's do an or, so that's double slashes, and another parenthesis. So within these parentheses, we're going to declare what's actually going on with our horizontal and vertical values. So let's do horizontal is greater than 0.1f, and then do or vertical is greater than 0.1f. So that's if is greater. After the or over here in the second parentheses, we're going to do the same exact thing but with the negatives. So we're going to say horizontal is less than negative 0.1f, or vertical is less than negative 0.1f. So that makes sure that whether it's a positive value or a negative value, it has to be above 0.1. Otherwise, don't turn our character. What would happen is that the player can just keep spinning, and you could completely miss that. So let's go ahead and open parentheses underneath that. Now this will probably be the most complicated line of the whole script, but just bear with me here. We're going to create a variable, which is var, not any type. It can be anything. So we're going to say rotation type, and then we're going to call a quaternion and do look rotation. And then we're going to, inside of that, create a new vector 3 and pass in our movement.x, which is converted here, as you can see. Don't need anything for the y. And then movement.z. Okay. Then we're going to go ahead and apply that rotation that we just did to our player object. So to access that, we're going to do transform.rotation. So now we're actually accessing the player's rotation, and equal that to quaternion.slurp, because slurp will just smooth the rotation rather than just being rigidly smoothing into that value. So it'll actually slowly turn that player into the direction we want it to be looking. And then we'll do transform.rotation. That's the starting value. And then rotation. That's the variable we declared here. That's the new rotation. And then we'll just say time.delta time times 10. This is going to control how fast we're going to smooth into that rotation. And 10 is a good value for it to be kind of smooth and still be controllable. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So let's put a little semicolon at the end, and we should be good from there. All right, so let's go ahead outside of these brackets. Now we're going to do the movement. If you really want, we can actually test this, and it should work if I'm not mistaken. So let's save that script, go in here, let it load, let it do its jazz. Make sure that in our movement script over here, we have a speed and a mycam. They're both empty basically. So speed, we can just put 10. Camera, we can assign the main camera that's in the scene, and let's press play and see what happens. We should be able to turn in the direction we're clicking. So if I press back, he'll turn back. If I press forward, he'll look forward. Look right, look right. And you can kind of see, you can make him turn whichever direction you're spinning, and you can make him go crazy, because why not? So yeah, that's the turning. Now we have to just make him move in that direction. So the rest of it is actually fairly easy. Let's go ahead and underneath the turning code, we're going to say moving code, and here we're going to say the rigid body velocity, so rigid body dot velocity, and we're going to just set it equal to the movement that we've already calculated, and let's multiply it by speed. So let's say new vector 3, and then say movement dot x multiplied by speed, so that's the x movement. And for the y, we actually not going to say 0 this time. We're going to actually say rb.velocity.y, because when we implement jumps and stuff, we wanted to keep the velocity in its y. And for the z, we're just going to do movement.z z, and the same thing multiplied by speed. Okay, so that honestly will get our player moving in the right amount, but there will be one little issue that will happen, and let's see if it actually happens. I'm gonna make this plane a little bit bigger because I need a little bit more movement space. Now let's press enter and see what's going on. So, oh, and he's gonna fall. Let's fix that real quick. Under the player, we're gonna make sure the rigid body is constraints and the rotations are all locked, because we don't want the physics to handle the rotation. We want the code to handle the rotation. So let's go ahead and press enter again, and now he shouldn't fall like a little weirdo. Let's just look on the top screen because it's blinding to look over here. You can see he's moving around just fine, and it looks like everything is working perfectly. So what else do we need? Well, one thing what happens with a lot of games is that when when I'm holding W down, it's moving up, and when I'm holding S, is fine. And if I'm going left and right, it's moving in the right amount of speed that we've given it. But if you press, let's say S and D at the same time, meaning bottom right, it's actually going to move double the speed because it's getting both of those values. So there's a simple formula to just equalize that to always be the same. Otherwise, when you're moving diagonal, you're kind of always going double the speed, which is, why would you want that? Unless you want that, man. So, so let's go ahead and quickly fix that. Let's go underneath this. Let's say eq speed, and this is actually quite simple. We're gonna have two if conditions actually, or an if else statement. So let's do if. We're gonna say the vertical velocity or the vertical input does not equal 0, and horizontal does not equal 0. So does not is set by these exclamation mark over here. And we're going to see speed EQ, which remember we have a variable over here. And we're going to set that equal to 0.75. Okay. Save that. And then we're going to say else. And then we're going to say speed EQ equals 1. So what that basically is doing, if you're not holding both of them, then it's going to set it equal to 1. Sorry, if you're holding just one of them, it's going to be 1. But if you're holding both of them, it's actually going to multiply the speed to be 3/4, basically. We do need to multiply it by our movement over here. So after speed, we're going to say multiplied by speed EQ. So you'll notice that multiplying it by just 1, it won't really do anything. So if you're holding just, let's say, W, you're actually going to be moving the same amount. But if you're holding the X and the Y direction at the same time, it's actually going to make it 3/4 speed, which is roughly the same thing. So let's go ahead and save that, go back here, let it do its loading, and let's press play. Let's see, and as you can see, he is moving the right amount of speed. He does take time to turn sometimes, which is fine. If you want him to turn faster, like you can see, you can increase that 10 value to be something bigger. That way it'll actually be turning much quicker. But besides that, everything is good. The player moves. He goes in the direction of the camera. So if I were to turn the direction of the camera, he would actually turn in that same direction. So yeah, that is for the basics of third-person controller. And I'll see you guys next time.